Credit card debt is the third largest source of household indebtedness in the United States, averaging over $7,000 per household. Only the $8 trillion mortgage debt market and the $1 trillion student loan debt market are larger. Credit card debt has also been growing, and as it grows, some of the problems related to excessive debt have become clearer. It's not just the economic problems caused by credit card debt that are of concern. Credit card debt is linked to stress and mental health issues, tobacco use, drug use, gambling, and other unhealthy behaviors. This makes credit card debt not just a financial health issue, but also a public health issue. That's why we'll be looking at the public health implications of credit card debt on today's episode of A Public Health Journal. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to look at some of the health and social impacts of debt, with a particular focus on credit card debt. Given these impacts, and the fact that 46% of American households carry a credit card balance, and that the average credit card debt is a whopping $15,000, points to the need to have a discussion of debt as a public health issue. We're going to start that conversation today with our guest, Darryl Dahlheimer, Program Director of Financial Counseling at Lutheran Social Services, the largest provider of financial counseling and education in Minnesota. Mr. Dahlheimer is a respected expert in personal finance who offers timely, trusted, and practical information on financial topics of community interest. He has written 3 financial education curricula and has been a financial counselor for over 3,000 families. Darryl, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Ed.
And I know back when I was at Boynton Health Service at the University of Minnesota, and we noticed students getting credit card debt, we brought you on to help us kind of work that through. What were some of the things that you've learned working with college students about credit card debt during those years at the university?
Right. Well, some were expected, like the research that showed that there was a lot of stress and a negative correlation between grade point and debt. So the higher the debt, the more drop in grade point. But the things that were unexpected were the fact that freshmen and sophomores were dying to get a credit card. They would go to great lengths to get one, despite what every other adult might have thought about that. And it was only the juniors and seniors who came for the help because at that time they had a world of pain. But we relearned that credit card was a rite of passage.
Okay, so let's kind of put this into context. And I mentioned in my opening there are 3 big chunks of debt. That the top 3, certainly a lot of these, or at least 2 of the 3, relate to college students. But home mortgage debt, credit card debt, and student loan debt. What's the impact that these have on individuals, and how do those impacts differ?
Okay, they really are different in terms of their feel for how they're perceived by people, and also the actual impact they have, partly because of the rules of the different kinds of debt. So let's start with home mortgages. The norms have changed. In the past, maybe our grandparent or parent generation, the idea was to get a 30-year plain mortgage, pay it off faithfully, you own your home, you walk free. And that's a successful rite of passage, a definition of elder success like retirement was or something. But the norm changed to become the house as credit card, and there were many, many elaborate products put on that encourage people to cash out their home equity. And of course, there was a time when home equity was rising, and that was allowable. But things go in cycles, Ed. And when the cycle went back down, there was first a foreclosure crisis of these exotic mortgages that were really set up predatorily. You didn't have to have any income. They were at adjustable rates, option arms where you were paying interest only, or where the payment might jump by a few $100s every month. Crazy stuff. We did a lot. But then the foreclosure crisis bloomed into all the way affecting a big swath of mortgages. So, for example, you could have had a regular mortgage, but now can't sell your house in retirement as planned because home equity values have been gutted across the board. And, of course, nationwide, we're all paying taxpayer bailouts for another generation or 10 about that crisis.
So for many, many years, home mortgages were pretty stable, pretty secure, pretty rational way to invest your money and kind of plan for the future. That's changed dramatically in the last couple of years. What about student loans?
And with student loans, of course, similarly, they were really what we used to call, quote, good debt. We used to say student loans are good debt because it's debt you're taking on to achieve an asset, a degree or a pathway in a career. And there were links between higher income and higher education attainment. So it seemed like a really good investment, frankly, as opposed to debt. But what's changed is when the cost of higher education spiraled out and when, in an attempt to give more access to college, student loans became unlimited, students sort of renormed those to be also about personal expenses, so that colleges, for example, were forbidden not to give every student the maximum that was possible if they wanted it. Not if they needed it, but if they wanted it. And by federal law, they were forbidden not to. And so many people didn't know, took it, and it seems like far off to pay that back. And I know that one of our counselors said to me that she had sort of lost her innocence at the U of M recently, and I said, why was that? And she said, because I saw my first undergraduate with $100,000 of student loan debt.
Okay, so again, student loans, which traditionally had been pretty stable, pretty rational way to finance things, have changed in the last several years.
Yeah, and the norm becomes more that you're leaving with a degree heavily indebted, almost with the size of a mortgage.
All right, and then you get credit cards, the third, part of this stool. And for many years, people didn't have credit cards. I mean, credit cards are a relatively new phenomenon. But did they have the same pattern where they came on as a rational way to borrow and have changed in terms of how they're being marketed and how they're being used?
Right. They also have changed. Think about the norming of debit card and credit card use for fast food, for example. That didn't exist before 2004. It wasn't allowed. But now people swipe and swipe and swipe. And we know from the research of behavioral finance that personal finance rules change when you use plastic. It doesn't feel as real, and people statistically spend less when they use cash. So the plastic allows more of the overspending we see in America, and there's a bunch of traps and trips on that, including if you don't pay your credit card on time, it becomes default rates of interest and late fees and over-limit fees that really can bury you. So the snowball effect of credit cards is unique to that kind of debt. And there's kind of a magical thinking where one of my budgeting clients years ago, she came for financial help, and we were doing a budget, and we'd go down the categories like groceries and heat. And when we got to holiday spending, she brightened and said, I didn't spend anything, I charged it this year. And I thought, I've learned something
magical
valuable.
Thinking.
Yeah, well, and I'm not making fun of her. This happens to all of us. We statistically all have magical thinking because we'll make a purchase much easier on the plastic.
So, and this is a program about public health. How do you see debt, whatever kind of debt, as a public health issue?
Okay, well, I think about what actually affects our physical health and mental health, and there's really good research, as you mentioned, that debt is a huge stress factor. When people are asked in divorces, what's the cause of divorce or the origins of this, the number one cited reason is money conflicts, which often revolve around debt. Of the 3,000 clients I saw, which were just general community clients who could have come for any financial counseling, about 2,800 of 3,000 were debt-driven. So it's really epidemic level, which makes me think of public health. And it also is part of that holistic mind-body environment type of health where it really undermines people's well-being.
All right, so I want to go into each one of those major causes of debt and see if there's some difference in our psychology about credit card debt and mortgage debt and student loan debt, but we need to take a little break first.
Sure.
We'll be back right after this message.
Paying back high-interest credit card debt but making no headway can feel like you're burning your own money. It doesn't have to be like that. With a debt management plan through LSS Financial Counseling, the average person reduces their debt by over $5,000 within the first year. Feel relieved, feel victorious. Take action to conquer your debt with the help of LSS Financial Counseling. One payment, lower rates, peace of mind.
Welcome back. We're talking about debt as a public health issue with Darryl Dahlheimer from Lutheran Social Services. Darryl, when I think of debt, home mortgage debt and credit card debt and student loan debt, I've had, well, a little bit of each of those. They sort of trigger different things in my emotions. And how do people view these kinds of debt? Do they stress people in a different way, or do they interact with this debt in a different way?
Gosh, I don't know if there's ever been research about that, but that was a great topic for any graduate student watching this. I think that the traditional value of owning a home has always felt sort of almost dead center to the American dream. So I know when people are going to lose their home, or they feel like at the sheriff's sale notice and they're about to lose their home, they're really quite desperate. So our foreclosure prevention counseling really is around reassurance and slowing down the panic and thinking clearly. That we get crazy decisions based on the value of, like, if I'm a success, I own my home, and those norms are shifting a little bit, but that's a special type. Student loan debt, I think people are loyal to and sort of feel like, well, I earned this debt. Credit card debt feels more like it sneaks up on you. We used to see a steady supply of 30-year-olds who were bitter about their 10 years of accumulated credit card debt for that pizza that they had never paid off in college. So there's something more angry about the credit card debt, I think, on some of our clients.
Now, I know, home mortgage it's a topic all to itself, and it has just totally rearranged our economy over the last 5 or 6 years, and student loan debt, another topic by itself. Let's delve in a little bit more into the credit card debt. When did credit cards first start to become an issue of concern in our society?
Sure. Well, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even beginning 90s, you couldn't carry a balance. You were supposed to use the card like a charge card, pay it in full. So it became more a convenience service rather than carrying cash. But they allowed people to take a balance and pay this minimum 2% payment, typically. So you could charge $1,000 and only pay $20 a month, which sounds like what friends do, right? It's like, oh, just pay me back $20 a month, okay? But when you pay it back that way, even if you've never made a mistake and defaulted to high interest, 28, 29%, even if you never do that way, the distance to paying it back is so large that when you've charged, for example, $1,000, you might pay back $4,000 of accumulated interest and payments. So really in the early 2000s, it escalated because the number of cards in existence, over 1 billion cards for our 200 and some million people at that point. And again, as I said, the norms changed where credit cards were seen as a healthy use of things. In fact, people would play games like, I'm not charging, I'm making my Sky Mile points and things like that. So it became more of a social status good thing, or a normative thing to have a credit card, as opposed to for emergencies. And unfortunately, the flip side of that is where we got away from it is savings. Because if you ask our grandparents, for emergencies you need, they fill in the blank savings account, and now if you ask anyone, they fill in the blank credit card.
So how did this come about? Are most credit cards given through banks? Or other kind of financial institutions?
No, it's mostly banks and credit unions, both, that do this, and they offer that as a very profitable kind of loan.
So when did they start seeing this? Said, oh, this is a new market. There must have been some place along the line they said, all right, we could make some money on this.
Yeah, the late 90s or early 2000s was when it just exploded, and you've seen the average credit card balance ratchet up from like 1,000 or 2,000 up to 5, up to 7, so it continues to grow.
So why did that happen? How did we get into the point where it went from, I'll just use it for unique kinds of things as a kind of a bridge to something, to, all right, I'm using it on a day-to-day basis for everything.
Of course, we teach personal responsibility, and we all have to take responsibility for our financial choices, right, as consumers. But beyond that, there is an environment for those choices, right? And so the environment has been that as much credit as you could possibly take, like based on your income, that you will be offered, and sometimes even more. So the example of that is the extremes like payday loans or private student loans at hundreds of % interest are still offered to people who have really statistically very little possibility of paying that back. It becomes more of a debt trap or a harvesting of fees, rather than the straight transaction, which is if you're a bank and I take a loan, it's a loan to help me and I pay it back in clear terms. So I think that people are really in a different place with that, and it's not a healthy place.
Well, I know, let's talk about tobacco. People know, the personal choice, they know tobacco is not a good thing for them, and most people don't want to smoke, but they get sort of bombarded with the messages, the cultural norm messages, the marketing, the promotions from the tobacco industry, and they start smoking, particularly as young folks. I would think the same thing happens with credit cards.
What a great metaphor, because originally we thought, like, okay, as a non-smoker, I look at a smoker and I feel judgmental because it's like, hey, why are they making that bad choice? But then you step back and learn about the Joe Camel advertisements, or the fact that throughout my parents' childhood, all the actors were paid to smoke in scenes in movies. They actually put that in to make that the norm, and very popular, sexy Hollywood stuff. So then you think, like, wow, so this environment was all about creating landmines. Maybe it's not about individual choice. And then you think about that with credit card debt. It's kind of like, oh, okay, so there actually are stories about people who were issued credit cards to their cows in rural area because they would just harvest rolls of names, and with no credit check would just throw out cards to see if they could, sort of like fishing with a net, to capture people. So there was a Mrs. O'Leary at one point equivalent that got a credit card approval.
So if the banks are pushing these things out, isn't there some bad risk for the banks? Like, if you don't have any income, if you can't pay this back, why would I give you a credit card?
Well, I think the risk gets socialized through the bankruptcy process. And so, with 1.5 million people going bankrupt, so, about 1 in every 200 of us is going bankrupt, wiped out every year with Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy filings. So what happens then is all the creditors walk away. But with credit card debt, if you think about making, at default rates, 28% interest, you can afford to lose quite a few customers with 0 payment back because you're making so much on the others. It's the equivalent of successfully selling hamburgers for $100, and you sometimes don't care if some people walk away from the counter.
Okay, so are credit cards being marketed to all ages, or are they being preferentially marketed to certain demographics?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know the research now. It seemed like for a while, if you were alive and breathing, you could get a credit card. Now it looks like they are making some demographic marketing branding things. They certainly have had a preference for younger consumers for a long time. So the younger consumers being college students originally, and having that, because if you start to develop a card, you sort of become an ex-bank branded person for that time. But honestly, they've made Hello Kitty cards, and they've got all these prepaid kind of fun background cards that parents can load to get practice shopping with credit cards. And
what are the implications of that? Because I know to credit, you can't really engender credit until you're 18, right? Or is it?
Theoretically, you can't take you become legal to sign documents at 18, so theoretically responsible, for example, for a cell phone contract that you actually need a co-signer for legally under 18. So 18 is the age of consent about that. But in the CARD Act, which was passed a few years ago, was a major credit, CARD Act, it was a major credit law reform, and it specified under 21 you can't be offered a credit card unless there's either A, proven ability to pay, or B, a co-signer over 21. Unfortunately, what's happened is this law designed to slow down the branding of college students getting in trouble with credit cards instead has been interpreted to say if you have any income at all to pay the minimum payments. So if you have $10 of income per month that you can prove, good enough. Or in some cases, if you have no income but you have a student loan debt, that student loan proceed counts as your income. So the offering of credit proceeds apace. Can I give you an example of that also?
Sure.
So the payday loans, which we all know are exotic, at hundreds of % interest, a total trap because people don't have it 2 weeks later and roll it and roll it and roll it. So there's all kinds of agreement in our society that payday loans are as predatory as the word gets. Banks now have offered payday loan equivalents inside the bank to their customers. So again, it's the norming of exotic products in the same way that these weird mortgages, never even heard of until the year 2000 or so, became the normative, most sold by brokers kind of thing. And the same way that private student loans, which default to an APR of 21% or more, with no remedies in the federal system, become normative and offered through financial aid offices. So it becomes like laying the fox in the hen house sometimes, and while there's technical disclosure, I laugh. Anyone who's ever gotten a credit card knows that if you unfold the accordion, in 2-point font there's 15 pages of disclosure, but that's not financial education.
Right. Well, I want to. We could go on all day probably about the problems, but we're going to have to talk about some of the solutions. Sure. But we'll get to those right after this message. We'll be back right after this message.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
Welcome back. We're talking about credit card debt as a public health issue with Darryl Dahlheimer from Lutheran Social Services. Darryl, I look at debt sort of like I look at illness and disease. You know, you can treat it once you have it, or you can prevent it from happening in the first place. And ideally, you prevent it. So let's look at credit card debt in particular. How do you keep yourself from getting into the situation where it's a problem?
Sure. Well, let's distinguish right away credit card debt from having a credit card and using it. Mm-hmm. Having a credit card and using it is a very important way and easy way to build good credit. And in fact, for FICO credit scores, simplest, best, fastest way to build it. So we just tell people, get a card, charge one thing you'd have anyway, like a bag of groceries or a tank of gas, pay that debt in full so there's no interest charges, and every month, on time is what's recorded. Mm-hmm. So that's a beautiful use of credit, a true for emergencies and for building good credit record. Mm-hmm. But where people get in trouble is when they start to carry credit card debt. Mm-hmm. That's like a self-mutilating event, actually.
Well, how about some of these promotions? If you sign up for this credit card, you'll get a free T-shirt. If you sign up for this credit card,
right.
you'll get.
Well, really, truly, no problem with getting the credit card, as we say, but carrying the debt is the problem. You could get it, but the trouble is when you have it, it's really easy to use it, and it's easy to overspend. So we tell people you're invited to pay the minimum, which is kind of like Harriet Tubman walking to slavery 1 inch at a time when she wanted to take big strides to the north. Mm-hmm. So we want to encourage people to pay more than minimum, ideally to pay it in full every month. But if you already have big debt, go get the solutions, which are either in the nonprofit sector through debt management plans or voluntarily paying much faster, like using your tax refund to pay a lump of it or paying more each month out of your budget.
Yeah, but before I still want to stay in that prevention piece. Who teaches kids and young adults that? Is that a family issue? Is that a school issue? Is that who's responsible for doing that?
It's actually quite a lot in terms of the social consequences and the societal need for this. It needs to be more than family, I think, because many families will say the best they can say to their kid is don't do what I did. Mm-hmm. Or in the case of my parents, the rules changed by the time they told me and what applied to me. So I think there is a need in school to do this. I don't want to double up on the poor high schools who already have requirements, unfunded mandates. But in some ways, having a requirement for this is about as sensible as having driving instruction and sex ed. And these are practical life skills with big consequences for bad information. Mm-hmm.
Is there any responsibility that the corporate sector has? The banks and financial institutions?
I'm going to say that I think that it's a conflict of interest for them, although there are banks and certainly credit unions that support financial education. The difficulty being that the use of the products is also part of how they make their profit or part of how they sustain
Well, I was just wondering,
themselves.
not so much in terms of their educating, but changing some of their policies on how they market or how they put these programs together.
Well, that's not the way the market works, Ed. Okay. I mean, the market works because payday. There are now more payday lending stores, actual storefronts, than there are McDonald's storefronts in America.
Really?
Okay, so that's not the way the market works. The market, unregulated, will always go for short-term gain, and that's the way it should be. But then you balance that out by having the financial education of consumers for personal responsibility and effective regulation to take the worst painful predatory parts out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then if somebody has credit card debt, how do you get out of that? You had mentioned a couple of things, but
sure.
Kind of walk through that. What if you have somebody in your office? Say,
sure. Well, if people really have the ability to, pay extra, that's a great way to just do it. In fact, there are computer programs that show you how to power pay your way down by paying extra each month on the principal, not just the interest, because most of the minimum is interest. However, most people benefit from some kind of structure. So the nonprofit sector, consumer credit counseling places like LSS, have an option called a debt management plan. And it's not what you think or you hear about on TV. In fact, these are rarely, if ever, advertised on TV or radio because it's a true nonprofit product. How it works is you make an agreement to stop using the cards. You make a payment through the nonprofit once a month to the credit cards, and they all voluntarily lower their interest rates. So instead of these predatory rates at 28, 29, 30%, they voluntarily go more like 5, 6, 7%. And they offer that just to this nonprofit sector. We're a member of the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, which is how you can tell who's safe in my industry. And the NFCC gets these great rates from creditors because they know it's in their best interest to be paid in full. FICO is on record of saying on-time payments through a debt management plan count as great credit. So really it's a win-win-win. The creditors get paid, people get to get out of debt faster in a structured way that builds success. And for our end, in the nonprofit world, we get to see people thrive. And often when they're done making their, let's say, $150 payment every month to the creditors, when they're done then, they have a habit of paying $150 to themselves. So it becomes a savings jumpstart for that. So that's the healthy alternative, is a DMP, or debt management plan.
All right, and it sounds like to get these lower rates with the financial institutions, you have to go through one of these. You can't just do it on your own?
Well, on your own, the people can always ask for those, but those rates typically tend to be less for the life of the debt and more short-term. They also often require a higher minimum payment, and also many creditors don't offer those to individuals, so it becomes like, yeah, I can get the rate on this one, but not that one. So the debt management plan's idea is it's a total debt-free picture. So you're stopping the creation of new debt, you have the support with budgeting, and also the creditors lower the rates so that you have that sense of success. It's 5 years maximum on the DMPs because of the state licensure for those. There's a law about that. And so, wow, 60 months or less seems like nothing to people who have been in debt for 10 years. And not, you know, the trouble is not people who are even in trouble with debt, but the people who are just making no headway. God, how many people are just paying every month?
Going to be here for the next 30 years. Yeah, so we just touched a little bit about some of those things, and we're going to be putting up a website and a telephone number. Can people contact you and LSS to get more information on?
Yeah, we have a toll-free number. We have 8 offices throughout the state. We also do it by phone and online. It's free counseling, and then the debt management plans are a really small monthly fee and a way to structured walk toward freedom.
All right, good. Darryl, well, this has been very helpful. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
I suspect that most of you watching this program never thought about debt as a public health issue. After our discussion today, I hope you have learned that because debt affects a lot of people and can impact one's emotional and physical health as much as one's financial health, it is a public health issue, and a growing one at that. Because of today's discussion, I also hope you begin to ask questions about whether or not other problems in our society are also public health issues. What about lack of affordable housing, inadequate public transportation, low minimum wage, food deserts, education disparities, and unfair tax policies? Are these public health issues? Yes, these and many more are public health issues because they affect the long-term health of many people in our society, and because the cause can be prevented with proper policies, programs, and initiatives. These are some of the social determinants of health that are becoming recognized as the prime movers of health. I hope this discussion reminds you that health cannot be created just by the people in the health field. Only when we are all looking at the health implications of all of our activities and policies will we be able to attain the goal of being a healthy society. After all, public health is what all of us as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy. And you are an important part of this public health effort. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.